How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is PSReady, my channel all about PlayStation. Unfortunately, I still have this cold. Thank you for bearing with me on it. In today's video, I have 3 topics to cover. The first one is don't believe the lies about the PS5 Pro. The second one is that Sony has a really crappy situation on their hands with the 30th anniversary PS5 Pro. And finally, we're going to talk about how 2024 didn't actually end up being that bad for PlayStation. All right, let's talk about this first news story here, which is that you shouldn't believe the lies about the PS5 Pro. I understand that people are mad about that $700 price point. I am too. I think it is high, right? Like, it's really hard and maybe even impossible to argue that $700 for a mid-gen upgrade just makes complete sense. I think there's a lot of factors that caused it to be $700 that aren't entirely Sony's fault, but me as the consumer, the person spending my money, of course, I would never argue if they could figure out a way to make it maybe $600 or $550, $575, or even $650. That $699 price tag without the disk drive is just absolutely very sky high. It's really impossible to argue. And it's even crazier considering that for a long time now, ever since the launch of the PS3, everyone just kind of assumed Sony would never hit that $600 price point, let alone $100 more than that at $700, because when they released the PS3, it was $600 and that was disastrous. That's what gave Xbox the insane lead that they had for 90% of the Xbox 360 PS3 generation. Of course, once Sony started cooking on their great first party games like Uncharted 2, Uncharted 3, Infamous 2, Resistance 2 and 3, Killzone 2 and 3, X, Y, and Z. They had a ton of great games. They were able to recover their lead, but one of the biggest factors for that was, of course, the PS3 Slim that came out at $249. So a big price drop from that $600 launch price. But again, after seeing how games run on it and being in a completely different financial situation, and I'm not acting like I'm rich or anything. I'm definitely not. I think I'm like at the bottom of middle class. You know, being a YouTuber, you can be rich, but you have to be like a millions of views kind of YouTuber to be a wealthy, loaded dude. I mean, I do fine and I get to have a cool job, which is why I love it. But with that being said, while I'm by no means rich, I'm obviously doing a lot better than I was in the PS3 generation when I was in high school, right? Like, I worked all the time. I had a landscaping job where I would do my grandma and my grandpa's house and a few other houses around my parents' house. I also worked at my dad's nut factory, which might get me demonetized. You know what I'm talking about, like cashews. I would roast them in a big vat of oil and I'd get all these scars on my arms from the oil bubbling and burning me. And then the best part of that job was after I cooked all the nuts and bagged them, I got to drive all over Michigan and deliver them. I also worked at Staples. So I was like building up money, but I had to work a lot more jobs and my dad was paying me like $6 an hour. So like I wasn't like making the same money that I am now, thankfully, because, you know, I do a lot of work here on this channel. So yeah, I can't afford the PS5 Pro. I am excited for it, mainly because I'm seeing how much better it's going to run games. And it seems like a lot of other people, despite the big negative backlash from people who are fine with their PS5 or maybe just upgraded from their PS4 to a PS5 and are feeling that buyer's remorse because there's a new console coming out. And of course, the Xbox fans who just live under every Twitter post about the PS5 Pro. It seems despite all that, people are still showing up to pre-order the PS5 Pro. I went and I looked at all these different retailers that have done their pre-orders now, and while it's not sold out, it's still the #1 selling console. It's beating the PS5 and every Xbox by a wide margin, so it shows that people want better performance, and because this is a mid-gen refresh, it doesn't have to completely sell out. It can sell really well without selling out because it gets everyone in on the PS5 generation. So while I think the vast majority of the people who are purchasing a PS5 Pro are definitely owners of a PS5 or maybe a PS4 already, like they're not getting a lot of brand new gamers coming in with the PS5 Pro purchase for $700, it's keeping people in the PS5 ecosystem, which is great for us because we want PlayStation to at least thrive so we continue getting PlayStation games going forward. And I'm going to be honest, the one game that I think I'm going to test out my PS5 Pro with when I get it on day one is Silent Hill 2. I know it's Halloween season and I wanted to play it during Halloween, but I just got a good feeling about that game running at 60 FPS on the PS5 Pro. I'm not going to get too deep into the technicals about it, but usually when a game can't hit 60 on PS5 and it still drops frames in quality mode, which Silent Hill 2 does, that's when I start looking at the PC port. I'll buy it, try it out, see if I can run it at 60. And then if I can't, because Steam lets you do that as long as you've played less than 2 hours of the game, and then I move back to the PS5 because I know I'm getting the best experience. It's screwed up across the board. On PS5, you get frame drops when you're traversing between different areas. That, of course, comes down to Unreal Engine 5 and developers being unwilling to fix the biggest issue with that engine with their games. But on PC, whoo, it is 1,000 times worse, man. Like, you stutter like every 2 seconds in that game, and the animations break. So like when you're running down that path right after you get the map in the car at the beginning of the game, when the stutters happen, when it loads in the next area, it resets the running animation for James, and he like lurches forward, and it looks like the game is breaking down. And there is a way to fix it. You have to put in a code and then run the game at 30 FPS. So if I have to do all that to get a stable 30 FPS out of my 4090 enabled PC, screw it. I'm just going to play it on the PlayStation 5. So, but I am playing a lot of indie horror games right now. I'm playing the Resident Evil 1 remake, which is not an indie horror game. That was the worst first option to go with. I'm sorry. I also just beat Crow Country, which I think is a great Resident Evil 1 style game. I have Conscript. I have a ton of other games that I want to get into, like Silent Hill 3 on the PS2. I have that on my Steam Deck. So I feel like I can get through those throughout the rest of Halloween. And then when I get my PS5 Pro on November 10th, I can jump back into Silent Hill 2, because I put about 4 or 5 hours into it so far, which I guess is like a third of the game. I'm finished with the apartment building, and just having it drop frames at 30 FPS, that's kind of like my limit. If you can't even hold a consistent 30 FPS, I'll just wait for a patch or, of course, better hardware. And as it turns out, I've got less than a month to wait for better hardware that will presumably, but most likely, be able to run it at a locked 60 or at the very least a locked 30 with better graphic settings. I feel like that wait is worth it for me personally. So yeah, I know there's a lot of doomsaying out there, and I know I got to be careful and not get too excited for the PS5 Pro, but if I'm being honest with you guys, I am really excited for it. I want to go back to how games were running at launch of the PS5 generation, where everything was 60 FPS, mostly because they were cross-gen games. But with the PS5 Pro, it looks like, at least just based on videos I've seen from Digital Foundry and other YouTubers who got their hands on it early, that it's going to be like the launch of the PS5 with cross-gen games, but with next-gen PS5 games. And I could not be more excited for that. So yeah, I got my pre-order in, got my 30th anniversary DualSense all ordered. And that kind of leads us into the next story, because I had to double check if my pre-order was canceled or not, because Sony apparently and other retailers oversold the PS5 Pro 30th anniversary edition. Now, I expected this to happen within the first day or two of PS5 Pro pre-orders going up, because every time there's a hot console or a new piece of hardware out, they always oversell it if it sells out. And then unfortunately, the people who got in a little too late, they see cancellation emails within 48 hours. But this time around, it's happening weeks after, and it's not just limited to Amazon, who are like the biggest offenders of this. It's happening on Best Buy and PlayStation Direct as well. And this situation really sucks this generation in particular, just because so many of these consoles have been bought up by scalpers who had bots running to be making sure that they got their console first, like before everyone who actually wants to buy it, open it and play it, set up their new stand for their PS5 Pro, use their new PS1 inspired DualSense Edge, use their PlayStation paperclip. Those people are the ones being punished in this situation by having their orders canceled, because of those bots they run. The ones that are being shipped out are being sent to scalpers, and I think that's absolutely ridiculous. So I went ahead and I checked my email just to double check and make sure my DualSense Edge pre-order went through, and thankfully it did. I was kind of not really too scared, just because I got in pretty quickly because I woke up so early and got in that queue to get into the PlayStation Direct store. But yeah, I am still very excited to know that my PS5's DualSense Edge PS1 edition is coming, because then I can live my dream of having my PS5 Pro on my big 70-inch TV upstairs, and then I can have my PS1 inspired DualSense Edge there, and then I still have the regular DualSense Edge that I can then put on my PS5 Slim upstairs at my Warhammer painting desk, and I can use a DualSense Edge on everything at all times, because nothing is worse than being lazy and getting some time at the end of the day to sit down and play some Space Marine 2 while I wait for my washes to dry on my Blood Angel that I'm working on. Here's a picture of him. And then realizing that I don't have my DualSense Edge and having to walk all the way downstairs. This is a major first world problem, but it's one that has consistently become annoying to me. So I am excited to have 2 DualSense Edges. So hopefully, if you're one of the people out there who were lucky enough to get in early enough to be able to pre-order that special edition PS5 Pro, you aren't one of the canceled orders, but I really hope they come up with a better system. I talked about this last week, but I really think Colin from Sacred Symbol's idea to use PlayStation Stars as a way to get into the special edition stuff early just makes so much sense, because it's rewarding the people who play the most on your console, which at the end of the day should be exactly what Sony's doing. Now, he said to do level 4. I think that's a little too far because hardcore gamers buy physical games, including myself. So I have enough games for my PlayStation 5 where I should be well above level 4, maybe even close to the secret level 5 level. But because I buy so many physical games and you don't get PlayStation Stars credit for those, I'm still stuck like halfway to level 4 at level 3. Anyway, that brings us to the next news story here, which is 2024 really that bad for the PlayStation 5? Now, going into this year, Sony kind of primed us to not expect a great year because they said they had no major games releasing, but here we are in October and they've had a really good year just looking at the landscape of games they've released. So from the first and third party exclusive range, we have stuff like Stellar Blade, we have stuff like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, we have Black Myth Wukong, which is still not on Xbox, we have Helldivers 2, we have Rise of the Ronin and Silent Hill 2, and The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered and Until Dawn Remastered. And by the end of the year, we're going to have Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered. So of course, it seems like there's a lot of remakes. I'd say it makes up about 40% of the releases that Sony did this year, but I think they deserve to be commended at least a little bit for making sure there are releases every month or so for the PlayStation 5. Now, Rise of the Ronin, I think it's a good game. I really enjoyed what I played of it. I just didn't enjoy how crappy it ran on the PS5, and there was just better stuff to play at the time, so I didn't really get into it. Stellar Blade, as awesome as it looks, I'm just so burnt out on Souls-likes. I can't play any more of them. I played through Elden Ring with my brother and my best friend this summer, and that's just the cream of the crop. It's the best Souls-like around, and I just don't have it in me to play other 40 to 50 hour Souls-like games, so I'm out on Stellar Blade. But Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I think, is one of my favorite games I've played this year. I'm still about 3/4 through on it, and I was actually going to go back and play it on my PS5 this October because there's just something nostalgic about playing JRPGs in the fall, but then I saw how amazing it looks and runs on the PS5 Pro, so I think I'm saving it for Thanksgiving break. But Helldivers 2, I think, is the game I played the most this year, and I had a ton of fun. Every one of my friend groups was playing Helldivers 2, because I have a lot of friend groups that don't interact with each other. Some of them are East Coast, some of them are in Chicago, and some of them are in California, so when I was playing Helldivers 2 a ton, I could get on first with my East Coast friends, and when they went to bed, I could play with the Chicago people who are an hour behind me, and when they went to bed, if I was staying up later than them, I would play with my California friends who were 3 hours behind me. So I could just play Helldivers 2 with all of my friends. And as far as multiplayer goes, that was like the best multiplayer experience I've had since playing Resistance 2 with my friends back in the PS3 days, or like doing some Destiny dungeons with my best friend George over the last couple of years. And honestly, out of the entire generation, I think so far I've had the most fun playing Helldivers 2. So while Sony said that this year was going to be light, it's clearly because they completely misjudged how successful Helldivers 2 was going to be, and I think they misjudged how good Silent Hill 2 was going to be. I am the Bloober Team defender. I've played their game since Layers of Fear was in early access. That's actually one of the first videos I ever made on YouTube, and I loved their other game, Observer, and I thought their third game, Layers of Fear 2, was great. Blair Witch was solid and the medium sucked, but they have a pretty good track record that I feel like people don't give them credit for, so I was fully expecting, you guys can go back to when Silent Hill 2 was announced, I've been fully expecting it to surprise people and be good since it was announced. So in terms of first party exclusives, Sony's definitely been lacking, but in terms of exclusives as a whole, I think 2024 turned out to be a lot better than people were expecting, and 2025 is looking incredible as well. Unfortunately, they didn't put a date on Ghost of Yotei, but because that game doesn't really look graphically any better, I would say, than Ghost of Tsushima did on PS4, I think it's fair to assume that it might come out in 2025. There's also allegedly a Venom game being worked on over at Insomniac in Spider-Man's engine, which feels like a perfect time to release that in 2025. They've also been cooking on Wolverine for a long time, and the leak of the game, the build that came out, it was basically functional. Like you could work, like move around the open world and everything, so I can't imagine that's too far off. We also know Ben Studios working on a game for since Days Gone came out, so 2018. So I'm assuming that that will be out sooner rather than later. So it seems like there is some stuff that is going to come out in 2025, which could make it the true launch year of the PlayStation 5. But as far as 2024 goes, I know we've all been hard on Sony this year, but for the crappy situation they're in, where it's just an off year where all their biggest developers are working on games to come out later, I think they did a good job making sure they had exclusives ready to go for the PlayStation 5. The ones that move consoles, they were definitely lacking on, but for people who already own a PS5 like me and probably like you, I think they did a good job supporting us with solid games to play throughout the year. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for you in today's video. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching and shape on.